What's up, everybody? Welcome to season 6, episode 2 of the Surf and Sales podcast. I am Scott Leese, one of your two co-hosts today, here with my good friend and co-founder of the Surf and Sales Summit, Richard Harris. How's it going, Richard?
It's good, man. It's good. I'm super pumped, and I have a question. You
Hmm.
know, are we gonna, for those who don't know, and for our guests, as we go to Portugal in October for Surf and Sales, right? Are we are we gonna try and record at least one podcast in Portugal? We've
That's
never
a great
actually
question.
recorded one, and we've never done one in Costa Rica because we're kind of busy. But I'm wondering if we should try to do one in Portugal.
Yeah, we
So
should. Why not? I think it's
yeah,
a good idea.
yeah, go
New,
go,
new, new location for Surf and Sales.
yeah,
New podcast
yeah.
location. Why not?
Why not? Why not? All
On
right.
scene. On scene.
Yeah, there you go. So,
Yeah, we'll have a whole production. We'll get like lighting and
yeah,
cameras and all
right,
that kind of stuff.
right. As long as Scott pays for it, because I know that's what you like to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
Right.
All of our longtime listeners know none of that will be happening.
Yeah,
But maybe we will do an interview when we're in Portugal.
yeah.
Maybe we will.
So,
We're here today with business coach and anti LinkedIn person,
oh, out
Jason
of the
Moss.
gates, coming
Straight
in
out of the
hot.
gate, a gauntlet. This man says, I don't need no LinkedIn. I got Facebook. I got YouTube. I got my website. What's going on, Jason? Welcome to the show, man.
I appreciate you hosting me. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Tell everybody a little bit about your background so they have some context on who you are and what you're coaching people on.
Well, I'm a business coach. I've been studying marketing for the past 20 years, and I've always had a fascination for sales and marketing and what makes people buy. But I think the journey probably started when I was 13 years old. I was a big computer nerd growing up in Danville, by the way, which we were jamming on this beforehand because Scott, I guess, lived several minutes away from where I used to grow up. And I was a big computer nerd growing up. I used to play, a lot of video games, but I used to hate how whenever I wanted to play my favorite game, I would have to go find the CD to the game. And the CD would always be like in the couch cushions or, under the couch or in the closet somewhere. And it would take me like 30
Same
minutes to
place
find the
my kids
CD.
hide their shit today.
Yeah. It hasn't changed. So I spent the summer one year learning how to program. And mostly while I was, in the bathroom, I was reading programming books like any kid in their teens would. And I built this software program called Virtua Disk. It basically made it so that you didn't have to put in the CDs when you would play your favorite games. And I didn't know anything about marketing or sales or how to get people to buy it. I remember going to my dad and asking him to set up a payment processor for me because I was, too young to actually accept money from people online. And he graciously allowed me to do that. And I'll never forget the day that I woke up and opened my email and had that first email that said, "You've made a sale." And it was like, phew, as a 13-year-old kid, I convinced some
How
stranger
much
on the
was
other
it?
side of the
How much
world.
was that?
It
Yeah.
was
How
like
much
20,
was?
How
maybe it was
much
like
was that sale for?
$17. It was like $17 or
Yeah,
something like
That's
that.
great.
But
that's
it
awesome.
signified something, and anybody who's in sales knows like that first sale, that first moment,
Yes.
is so magical. And just knowing that through the power of my words and through the power of this thing that I created, I could do business with this person I'd never met, that could add value to their life and that they could add value to mine. And honestly, since then, 20 years,
Okay.
I've been completely hooked.
So, Jason, I want to pause for a second. So, I'm gonna. Does that put you 20 years? Does that put you in your mid 30s?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you grew up in such a much more digital world in sales than where Scott and I did, right? Your Scott, your first sale was digital-ish, but you didn't do it in that digital format, right? You still had to
Mhm.
talk to the person, right?
So,
Jason, did you
yeah.
even talk to this person before you sold them?
No, it was a page on a website. It was copy
Amazing.
that I had written,
That's awesome.
and the person clicked the buy button.
That's amazing. That to me is like, what's the difference? Is that you just have a different digital mindset for that, which explains a couple of things I know we're going to jump into. But sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was
No, I
cool.
love that. And I'm curious to hear more about both of your journeys, but so much of what I've, kind of sat at is the intersection between the old and the new and what's changing and also the principles that don't change. And so much of what I see is the online world is really just what works offline. And when things don't work online, it's usually because we're trying to be something different than what we're actually doing offline. So the
Oh
principles
my
don't
God, there's
change.
like
It's just a
20 things
medium.
I could unpack with what he just said, Scott.
Do it. Unpack one of them.
So the part about the difference between, I don't want to, there's the business side, but I really like what you just said about what we're doing offline and online. I interpreted that as maybe we're not doing the same thing. We're not being consistent in those worlds. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that there's something very interesting that happens when you show up online. And I've been like building online businesses for, 18 years. And I found that, there's something weird that happens when it's you and me communicating this way, or when I'm writing an email that I can't see the person that I'm communicating with. And so we start communicating and showing up in all these ways that we wouldn't if we were just having a conversation with someone in person, using all sorts of weird copy and, aggressive kind of stuff that just doesn't really particularly land for people. And so much of the journey that I've taken through marketing is dismantling all of those things and getting back to the foundations of selling, which is really it's human. It's how do you communicate with someone as if you were showing up in a room. And when we can dismantle the fact that it's like the medium is not the message is maybe another way of putting it. Like the same thing that works when I send an email or when I pick up the phone or when I send a DM on LinkedIn or Instagram. The same principles apply to all of those mediums. And of course, there are nuances in terms of how you show up, but fundamentally, once you understand the principles, you can be effective with any of those
So what are
mediums.
those?
And
What are a couple of those principles as you think about them in the different realms of email, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook? There's some similarities, but there's some differences, there's nuances. And again, even tying it back to what you said about the humanity of it, right? What are some of those similarities and differences that you experience?
I think the biggest principle about marketing and sales is I see it as is empathy. It's the ability to step out of my own worldview and step into somebody else's, and to really deeply understand, not just intellectually, but emotionally, like what is this person going through? What's keeping up them up at night? Can I really try that on? Can I experience that and meet them where they are? And that principle applies whether you're talking about a sales conversation, a discovery call, or whether you're talking about sending a cold DM on LinkedIn. In terms of the nuance of how you do it, the hooks, the way that you would structure that message, there are big differences in terms of like the formats, like when you're communicating through video or when I post a reel on Instagram, for example. I know that I have the first 3 seconds of that reel to be able to basically convince somebody to watch that. And so there's my hook. Versus when I'm communicating something through a YouTube video, the thumbnail and the headline are essentially doing the same thing. So I need to make sure that's like the first line of my reel, for example. So there's nuances in terms of how you structure and how you might format something. But the principle of being able to meet somebody else where they are, being able to speak to their worldview, their pain points, their challenges, their desires, their dreams, for me to actually have empathy as someone who's selling to you, that's the thing that I think is foundational to all success in sales and marketing.
So
And I see sales and marketing actually the same thing. That's
are
another
you
thing.
saying then that any salesperson who improves and gets better, whether they realize it or not, is growing and increasing their level of empathy?
Yeah, because that's the thing that's underneath it all. I think like when I
This
when
may come as a surprise to you, Richard, but apparently I have some empathy.
I believe
Scott,
you do.
According to Jason, I would have empathy.
Scott, what we got to remember from yesterday's podcast, what's out is bashing Scott. What's in
Oh,
is
that's right.
is
Sorry.
Richard trying to give Scott grace.
Sorry,
And
sorry, sorry. Yeah,
that's all right.
I'll give you some grace too, Scott. Mostly
I
because you're from
appreciate that.
Danville.
Let's
That's
do it.
all. I mean, I think it's very easy to forget, to kind of get numb. Like, I mean, when you're showing up every day and serving people and selling, you start having the same conversations. You kind of get in this place where it's like,
Yeah,
I know
for
what this
sure. If
person's
you're
going to tell me.
selling, a particular product that you're not really enthused about or don't really care about, yeah,
Yeah,
that level of
even if you
monotony and
are, I
burnout
mean,
comes faster. I think it happens
yeah,
regardless of what you're selling, frankly, but it comes way faster if what you're selling is just like blah, whatever. Yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And getting back to that sense of curiosity and that sense of like, how can I truly seek to understand someone, what they're going through, and have that moment. So much of marketing is like, how do you create sales too? It's like, how do you create that moment of like, I see you, that moment where it's like, hey, I see what you're going through. I see that you're having this challenge. I want you to know that you're not alone. Like, I get you, and we're going to help you figure this out. Like, here's how we can
Do
help you
you,
solve that
do
problem.
you was there a moment for you? Again, you grew up digitally native, so you figured this out, at least in my head you did. Um, was there a moment in life where that clicked for you, where you're like, oh, I mean, obviously it started somewhere naturally because you figured it out at 13, that you created some level of messaging that resonated with someone. But I'm just curious, when did you sort of realize it and go all in on it? Or did you already know it? And you're like, why doesn't everybody else know this?
Well, I think for years, what I did was I copied like the formulas. Like people talk about in marketing and sales is the same way. It's like you start a sales call by uncovering the pain point, asking questions to get clear on what that is. In marketing, it's like you start by reflecting the pain point back to someone. So you might start a sales page by saying, do you ever struggle with this? And for years, I did that because I just thought that that was the right thing to do. But then I had this realization that the reason why I was doing those things, that the feeling that would create for somebody else when someone would read that copy, is they would have that moment where they're like, oh, somebody else understands me. Like someone, when I'm reading my pain points reflected back to me, it's not just like a rote thing. What it's doing is it's creating this moment for me where I feel like this person actually understands what I'm going through. Like I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel understood. I feel like someone else in this wide world of people actually gets me. That there's a point of human connection that happens there in that reflection back to me. And I think part of it was also just experiencing it on the other side and having really great conversations with friends where I would share something that was going on in my life and they'd be like, "You're having a really hard time right now, aren't you?" And I would notice what would happen to me when someone would do that. There'd be a moment of like, oh, I feel like I'm less alone, you know? And that's what we're doing in marketing and sales. Like we're creating those little moments where like when we do this, we create a bridge, like you and me. And understanding that not as an intellectual thing, but something as like a felt experience, something that I had now gave me like a greater awareness around when I'm doing these things. Why am I doing them? It's not just not just asking questions for the sake of asking questions, not just writing copy for the sake of writing copy. There's a feeling I'm trying to create in someone else and a
Yeah.
bridge that I'm trying to build between myself and them.
Yeah. It's all
And that
emotional.
changed everything for me. Yeah, it's 100% it's emotional.
What's curious to me is, do you feel like Facebook has been the best platform to convey that emotional experience? Whereas most people in all of our line of work today utilize LinkedIn as their primary tool for networking, community, business, this type of thing. So we are dying to understand why you've gone the route that you've gone.
Why do you shun us?
I feel like I'm
Yeah.
having an intervention here. Like
But I mean,
we need to
maybe.
sit you down and talk about this, Jason. Well,
Or maybe
so
you
the
need to
first
sit
thing
us
is
down and talk
Yeah,
about
maybe
it.
it's the opposite. Right.
Maybe it's not you.
the first
Maybe.
thing I want to be very like I want to be very clear. LinkedIn's a great platform, and I work with clients who have had a lot of success on LinkedIn. I'm pretty platform agnostic, like when I coach and mentor people. And just for me on a personal level, the first thing is you can pretty much reach anywhere. Like there are certain platforms that are going to lean a little bit more toward, like LinkedIn is great for B2B. I kind of sit in the world between B2B and B2C because I work with a lot of like individual business owners who, some of them are linked on, but honestly, they're everywhere for the most part. So it's like I can reach people anywhere, but I just I never really spent a lot of time on LinkedIn growing up because I didn't really work for anyone else. I always worked for myself. I spent a lot of time on YouTube um, and Facebook. And so those are just platforms I understand really well. I wish there was like a sexy soundbite that I could give you guys for why LinkedIn is the worst platform. The truth is, I think it's a great platform. Um,
It's
I
old.
just
I just interpreted that as what you just said is, Scott, we're old. This was our social.
no,
Like, I mean,
I
but
don't
I
know.
remember
I don't know. This guy's talking about how you use this Facebook, dude. I haven't had a Facebook account in like,
that's my
6 years or
point.
something, seven
That's my
years, something
point.
like
That's
that.
my point. Like I remember,
well,
Scott, when we worked at Leapfish together and we were
Yeah.
trying to generate buzz. And I don't know if you remember this. I remember having this idea of like, oh my God, if we get everybody, because we had like a 70-person sales team, if we get everybody to post about Leapfish on Facebook, and I think the average Facebook person had 149 followers, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, we could get 7,000 potential people to see our Leapfish thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, and we did it, but then we just sort of like turned our back on it. You know what I mean? Like we never embraced it at that level. And now it's like 20 years later almost. And it's like, boy, imagine what we would be doing if we'd embraced Facebook in 2008, 2009, even
Mm.
for that business, then for our own brands as we've grown today. Right.
Yeah.
Now we're,
Maybe
now we're 20 years behind.
it's too
yeah,
late for us.
yeah, maybe you guys you're just too late. I
Ouch.
I
That's how
I
you
think
sell
it's
somebody, by the way, Jason. Tell them they're too late.
yeah,
Sorry, I can't
and
help
Yeah.
it. It
There
was
that's
too
wasn't
late.
there
yeah.
wasn't much empathy in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I I think they're all useful. They're all great. The biggest mistake that I see most people make is
But
they spread themselves too thin because they're trying to figure out everything at once.
trying to be everything to
LinkedIn's
everyone.
like a
Well, one of the big distinctions that you talked about is, if you're more focused on B2C than
Mm-hmm.
you are on B2B, I can understand some of
But
that
is that
yeah.
true?
strategy.
Jason, we have that belief. Is that true? Or
I
is
said
it
that is true.
Well,
no?
there's nuance to it. I mean, LinkedIn, I think there's a couple things LinkedIn does really well. B2B for sure. Probably the one of the best platforms for outreach. Like if you're doing cold outreach, it's just Sales Navigator on LinkedIn is like it's amazing. Paid traffic, lead costs are really high compared to something like Meta, where you're going to get a lot more lead flow. Like through Meta, the quality is not as good, but for most small businesses, I find like the the lead costs being as high as they are on LinkedIn, it's not a great like paid traffic platform for a lot of folks. We've experimented with it. Like I stopped using it because it was just like, we get leads for like $10 on Facebook and it'd be like $75 or $100 on LinkedIn. And the quality was better, but you know, unless you're spending a lot more, it's hard to test and optimize with that kind of thing. So those are some of the benefits and drawbacks to LinkedIn. I think, I mean, YouTube's a great platform for discovery. I use a lot of like YouTube content in my business. I think is one of the best ways to like reach people who are like more in that like mindset of like I want to learn, so it can be a great platform for people who are more oriented around that kind of approach. They all have their pros and cons.
What
Blows
can
my
you
mind.
do?
First person that I've talked to that utilizes Facebook at scale
Yeah,
in a really
Yeah.
long time.
but
Well,
it's
I don't do a
also
lot of like Facebook organic. It's mostly like I do a lot of paid traffic on Facebook. Like most of our lead flow for the past few years has come from paid traffic
And
on
you're trying,
Facebook.
and so you're pulling from paid traffic on Facebook, you're pulling like small business owners. Are these like retail people? Are they
It's
online
yeah,
business
it's mostly
owners?
online, like
Online business
consultants,
owners.
coaches,
So you're coaching
authors,
other
experts.
coaches.
Yeah, and like consultants and people who are, scaling online businesses basically.
Okay, so what's the number one thing that folks like Richard and I are doing wrong who are somewhere in their journey of being a coach or consultant? What's the number one thing that you come across most frequently?
What's a big question? Tell me a little bit more about who this person is. I can give you a better answer.
I can see he's trying to do fucking discovery on me.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, there are people who, let's see, there are people who already did the like W2 thing for 4 or 5 years. Maybe they also did sales leadership for 4 or 5 years. So maybe they've got like 10 years total experience. They are a bit disillusioned with working for somebody else. And they see all these other coaches and consultants out there working for themselves, doing well, earning at least as much as they were earning working for somebody else. And they're like, I want to cut the cord, you know?
Yeah.
So these people come your way and they're like, Jason, I've been trying to run my own business. I'm struggling. What's the number one thing that is common amongst all of them? Like they
I think a
all
lot. Yeah, there's a bunch of things, but one of them is definitely like not being clear on the problem that you solve or not having a problem that you actually solve. Like,
interesting.
which is, I mean, most like if you're a sales leader, you're someone who's doing sales in a more established organization, you kind of take for granted like that. Most of that stuff is figured out. Sometimes it isn't. But for a lot of like newer business owners, it's like getting clear on the fact that number one, people pay you to actually solve a problem. Because a lot of people are just like, I just want to share this or I want to, you know, launch this thing or do this thing, but it flops because again, it's going back to the empathy thing, like realizing that people pay you because they have a need, not
Do you
because
think
you're
it's because
excited
they're
about selling
focusing?
something.
Do you think it's because they're focusing on, I could build my brand before they talk about the problems they solve? When if they talked about the problems they solved, their brand would then find them, as our friend Doug Landis likes to say.
I love that frame, what you just said, because people are way too focused on like themselves, in my opinion. I think that's one of the biggest issues that like gets in the way of success in business and marketing and all of it. It's like if you just get obsessed about like helping people and showing up and creating lots of valuable content that helps people. I mean, that's how I've built every business that I've ever built online. It was just, okay, how do I start with the other people first instead of myself? Who cares about me and my personal brand? No one cares about that. Why are they going to pay attention to me in the first place? It's because I'm sharing something of value with them that's going to help them solve a problem that they have. So, how do I just get obsessed about like what that problem is and then creating a lot of valuable resources to be able to help someone with that and use that as a bridge to bring people back into my world. And then whatever personal brand I've built off the back of that has been basically a byproduct of just showing up every day with the intention of how do I actually help people rather than how do I build a personal brand. I think people have it backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I want to shift back to something else you said earlier, which was, this intersection of old and new, what changes and what doesn't change, right? What's changed and what hasn't changed as you think about sort of the sales and marketing place in relation to what you're seeing in the world?
The principles haven't changed, meeting people where they're at, everything that we just talked about. The biggest shift has probably been there's a lot more noise, attention spans are a lot shorter, and the quality and the packaging of your message, the bar is much higher than it's ever been. Like when I first got started on YouTube back in 2016, I used to publish a video, and if it was relatively valuable for people, it would get a lot of visibility. Like I could get like 100,000 views on a video just by publishing something that was like pretty good with like a decent thumbnail, you know? But now if the first 10 seconds of that video are not absolutely killer, if the thumbnail's not amazing, if the headline isn't the best thing ever, if the video isn't like edited for retention so that basically like every second is something that people want to pay attention to and they don't drop off, then that video is not going to get visibility. So I think it's realizing that like we live in this world where There's so much more noise and so much more content competing for visibility. And so that places more of a demand on your communication. It needs to be tighter, it needs to be shorter, it needs to be, there's a lot more nuance involved in terms of how to present a message in today's world than I think there was, 10, 20 years ago when I started.
God, that is what we talk about, right? In terms of just trying to get our visibility, even on LinkedIn, it's the same problem, right? We talk about there's
It's
too
the
much
exact same
noise.
problem.
It's the exact same
Exact
problem,
same problem.
And I know you're starting to focus on video a little bit more. So
I
that's
don't know why I'm focusing on video more.
because
Everybody
I know.
says, "Oh,
I'll tell you why.
bigger reach. It's this, that, the other." I do all of that shit, and maybe I just suck at it.
But I know you. I know you. You get bored doing the same thing over and over. You need a new challenge. You need to break the code on this for you. And I know you, and you'll do it. You'll do it really successfully. And then a whole bunch of other people like me will try and follow, and we'll suck at it. So
and then you'll ruin it for me, and I'll have to
right,
go figure some new thing out.
right, exactly,
Basically, that's what I
right,
heard. Basically, yeah.
basically. So, but you got about three
to
years before that happens.
to your comment on video too, like I mean, I felt like for years I sucked at video, and once I started understanding like what the rules of the game were, it really helped me. And I think it's actually like quite simple, like how to succeed on video, on regardless of what platform you're on, LinkedIn, Instagram,
Okay,
YouTube.
so
It's all exactly the
if
same.
we want to turn Richard into a YouTube sales business coach star, what do we need to do? What are some tips you can give
Yeah.
us?
So there's two keys to success when it comes to content today. And this applies to text as well as video, pretty much anything. It's you got to get really good at capturing attention and you got to get really good at retaining attention. Those are the two things. Because all
Now,
of
how
these
do we do
platforms
that
are
though?
okay. Well, so I think the first thing just to know is like all these platforms essentially they're ad driven platforms, right? So their game is they want to keep people on the platform as long as possible so they can show them as many ads as possible. That's how LinkedIn succeeds. That's how YouTube, Instagram, all the platforms succeed. So if you can create content that basically gets people to stop scrolling and then watch or read as long as possible, you're helping them accomplish their business goals and they're going to put you in front of a lot more people. That's basically the key. So how do you do that? There's two parts. There's the capturing attention part and then the retaining attention. They're kind of like two different things. The capturing attention is all about having like a really strong hook. So if you're talking about video, it's like the first 3 seconds, 5 seconds of the video basically have to sell me on like, why should I pay attention to this? And very clear, like benefit driven hook that is super compelling. Most people start off videos, they're like, hey, nice to meet you. My name's, Scott, and I'm about to tell you everything, whatever. It's like you've already lost them. But to start a video and be like, there are 5 massive mistakes that are killing your close rate. And in the next 5 minutes, I'm about to show you what they are and how to avoid them so you can increase your sales right away. It's like just a simple hook like that, like would be infinitely more effective at capturing someone's attention. So that's the first part of it. And then the second part is once you actually have someone's attention in the first place, how do you make sure that they don't like scroll off to something else? And that's what retention is all about. And there's definitely like a lot of nuance to doing that well.
Is there
Uh,
is there a particular volume of video content that somebody should be shooting for? We
I
want to
think
get Richard YouTube famous. What do we got to do? Every day?
it's
Two a day?
I might have
it's
to
less
give up on
about
this New Year's resolution.
so consistency as the way in the way that most people have talked about it is a lie. Most
Interesting.
people will tell you like
Mm.
I should post, you need to post every single day. If you're talking about like nurturing people, I think there's some truth to that. But if you're just talking about how do I get in front of new people, like if your focus is top of funnel, lead gen, how do I get visibility? Quality is way more important than quantity. You're much more likely to succeed if you have one really good video than if you've got 20 of them that kind of suck or are mediocre.
You hear that, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's the
and
opposite of us.
yes, yes,
I've changed this
completely.
too because my strategy used to be much more volume based. But if you think about it from these platforms' perspective, it's like they have an abundance of content to choose from. think about how much content is being published on LinkedIn or YouTube, but they have a limited number of spots to show that content. Like when someone's scrolling through their feed, there's only so many places that they can put that content. So if you look at like the distribution of it's a game where there's infinite amounts of content they can pull from. Why would they put content in front of people that's half as good at retaining attention as another piece of content that would be twice as good? It would be a terrible business
the
decision.
thing that confuses everybody though is what is deemed good content, retaining content and whatnot, because I'll see a video or a written post that has gone off and I'm like, this is hot garbage. Like, it literally makes no sense. Sometimes I think to myself, this post is idiocracy in action.
At scale. At scale.
Like the only reason that this is like going off is because this is so fucking stupid and people are so fucking stupid that it appeals to the masses.
Yeah.
And then you see somebody else write something like really sharp, really unique, different, whatever, and it's just like tanks.
Sure.
Right. And you're like, what? So I think that's the disillusioned part, the disillusionment piece, that's tricky for people. And that's when you got to be consistent with it kind of advice comes out, like stick with it, keep going, keep trying and whatnot. That's the tough part. And it becomes harder and harder the longer you've done this. You've been doing video on YouTube for 8 years now, it sounds like, right? I think I roughly got serious about LinkedIn around the same time you got serious about YouTube, 8+ years. Sometimes I just wake up and I'm like, I'm out of fucking ideas. I've written everything that there is to write. I don't know what to do. And I don't want to play this game anymore. And the ultimate victory would be being successful and having enough freedom to not have to play the game on any of these platforms anymore ever again.
Yeah.
That's the end state.
A lot of people feel like that. And it's kind of the dark side to social
media. That's why Jason has job security, because he finds someone like Scott. His landing page.
He tries to peel him for everything he's got.
The landing page for Scott says, "Are you exhausted trying to come up with content daily? Does it frustrate you the amount of effort it takes to just do the creative part, even when you have a great idea?" Like that's Scott's landing page. Right there.
And Scott feels seen and heard and understood when he reads that.
So much empathy there, Richard.
I mean, Scott, I get you, man. Like it's not an easy game. And it's in many ways it's harder than ever, and it's getting difficult as attention becomes more of a scarcity. And especially with AI and everything that's happening, we can definitely talk about that. But I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next few years, especially as we see new.
That's fueling some of the frustration and fueling some of the urgency, because depending on what you believe, like, there's a lot of changes coming that could be much bigger than any of us are thinking about right now. So what can you do, if anything, to prepare yourself for that, so you're not impacted negatively too much, right? So we are running towards the end of our time. We always want to finish up with flipping it over to our guests and saying, hey, how can we be helpful to you? Do you have a question or two for one of us or both of us? So this is your time to try to peel us for some information. So, anything on your mind?
What I'm super curious about, because you guys have a different vantage point than me. You've been in the industry for longer. And so we kind of talked about maybe some of the more digital age stuff, but from your perspective, like what is your viewpoint on what's changed and what hasn't changed? That would be my question.
I think that the balance of power has changed in terms of workplace dynamics. It used to be 100% skewed towards employers and it is no longer that way. Some of that is creator economy stuff, like some of the platforms that we're talking about. Some of that is work from home stuff that the pandemic kind of fueled. But the bottom line is employees have more opportunity than ever before to make a living and are not necessarily as reliant upon employers as they used to be. So that naivete is gone. Everybody's seen under the hood. Everybody's very cynical, very jaded. It's like, oh yeah, sure, you fucking care about me a lot, company CEO. You know, stock price dips by a nickel tomorrow, you're going to lay off 2,000 people. The fuck do I want to do that for? Right. So that's a big shift. So now you see people, you know, not like Richard or I, who spent 15, 20 years in the game as a W-2 employee, like building and scaling and operating. Now you see people with like 1 or 2 years experience who say, I'm out of here. And now they're trying to be coaches, consultants, you know, creators, all that kind of thing. So that's a big, big shift right there. The motions that everybody used in order to sell and market to some extent, those are evolving, and what used to work just like literally is kind of on its last legs. You know, I rewind the tape 20 years. I used to make 100 cold calls and 50 people would pick up the phone. I make 100 cold calls today to CEOs of tech companies. What do I get? 2 pick up the phone, maybe?
I think -3.
Yeah, if I send 100 emails, how many people are replying now? 1, 2%, right? I mean, those numbers are like abysmally bad, to the point where everybody's questioning now, like, is this even the best use of my time? Is there a better way? Right? So those motions, the evolution of those motions and continued evolution of these motions, that's a massive change, I think, that is still not being talked about enough. And then the last thing is we're in the middle of the AI revolution that's like barely even just begun. And my personal opinion is we're massively underestimating how fast certain tasks and certain jobs and roles are going to disappear. And that's going to leave a big, big gap as far as employment. And I don't know what some people are going to do, frankly, if I push this out 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's hard for me to imagine what my grandkids might do in terms of work, right? Really kind of trippy stuff. Those are the 3 big things to me that are evolving, changing, that type of thing. Richard, go ahead.
Forgot the context of the original question, which is what do we see changing from our viewpoint or not changing? One of the things that is adjusting is on the sales side is we're already seeing the smaller transactional sale get bigger to go upstream per AI, right? It started with basic Amazon when they just sold books, right? Well, now you can go buy a car online and not talk to a human being, right? So the purchase price is becoming more comfortable with less human interaction. What I don't see changing yet is for the larger purchases, where there's a consensus buying committee, you're still going to have to talk to humans. I'm still trying to understand. So if I, work for even a mid-sized company, right? I've got 500 employees and now I need to go get some level of data security for my team, right? I got to get 6 people in my organization at least to help me figure that out. And then how much of that research can I really do on my own and trust it before I talk to a human? Right? When does that sale shift? Right. So the bigger the sale, the harder it is, I think, for them to buy it without consulting a human at some point. But if it's 2 or 3 people, well, maybe that's going to go away, right? That level of an SMB place might go away. And you'd be a good judge of this, is I also have this belief that for true SMB, right? For someone who owns something local, something small, the coach, the that's somewhere between B2C and B2B in that niche, because those buyers recognize their naivety around what they're trying to accomplish. Well, they want to talk to a human. How long are your customers, Jason, going to want to talk to you versus going online and buying what you do in a digital format? You probably, and you could, for what you do, you may be able to build that self-serve model versus the human existence model. So I wonder about this S&B world. And is that world going to, the guy who owns, two delis shops, right? Is he really going to go trust the online version of something, or is he really just want to get on the phone and talk to a human?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's fascinating to hear that. Yeah.
So but that's a belief system that I think. I think the biggest thing you talked about was empathy. Is how do we drive that empathy in the AI world that people trust the experience of that sales process? Right. I firmly believe that it's all about the experience. It's not about the journey. Right. So what experience are we building through the journey we perceive someone needs to go through? And once that clicks, that's when I think the floodgates, to Scott's points, will truly open. Right. Mm. So it's just going to be interesting. Like it's too early to make a prediction other than a hypothesis at best.
Well, I can definitely agree that a lot is changing, and I appreciate you both sharing your insights on that. And it's going to be a wild ride the next few years, especially
Yeah.
with AI.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting to talk. I would love to talk to you again in a year from now and see what's changed as you talk to the S&B world. Like what are you seeing shift with the AI place? Because I see that AI piece and those agents being capable of supporting the S&B market or even a smaller mid-market org, but it'll be interesting to see. So
yeah, I mean, we talk about this quite a bit too, the shift to AI, and my stance on this generally has been there's this kind of like bifurcation going on in the marketplace across the board. And you have this kind of race to automation and race to replace humanity with chatbots and chat GPT and these tools that, it's like I used to go to the grocery store and someone would check it out and scan all my groceries. And now I just, scan the things myself, and all of that's happening. And that's just going to continue. And then there's the race to how do we dial up humanity? And to me, a lot of what I talk about with my clients is, the power of a personal brand, as an example, is so much more relevant and so much more important in a world where anyone can go into Chat GPT and they can basically say, hey, write me a 500-word blog post on this, or, go have a sales conversation with someone on this. It's storytelling. It's sharing more of yourself. It's bringing more of who you are into business, because that becomes the rarity in a world where, we're all essentially interacting with chatbots that don't have that piece. So we talk about that quite a bit with my clients in terms of marketing. It's like, how do we dial up the personal brand? And I imagine that's also going to, migrate into the sales process as a way where you're, how can we decommoditize you as a seller, and how can we position who you are as someone feels connected to, not just because you have expertise and value and education to be able to, help them through a sales process, but also because they feel connected to you on a deeper level, because they feel like you have values that they share, and because there's some sense that they feel they want to engage with you as a human being, not just on this surface level transactional type of level. So I'm seeing a lot more of that shift in the world that I'm in, and I would imagine that might transfer over into larger businesses and organizations.
It will. It will for sure. So and we could go for another hour just on that topic alone, but alas, we can't. Because I apparently need to go cut some videos according to Scott.
Yes.
But Jason, how can people get a hold of you? Because it's not LinkedIn.
It's not LinkedIn.
Not LinkedIn, I'll tell you that. I mean, so jasonmoss.com, my website, is probably a great place to start. And we've got links to social, channels, YouTube, our email list, all that. And, say hi on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. And I appreciate you guys listening, and great to connect with you both too.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah, you
pleasure,
too.
man. You educated us a lot on some stuff that we've pondered about. So we really appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
Likewise. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Catch you later.
Thanks so much. We'll see you all next time on the Surf and Sales podcast.